Welcome back to the Lilyless podcast, where our goal is to be a handbook for the living. In episode 6, we speak with Brian Clarey. He's a lifelong journalist, founder of Triad City Beat, an independent Greensboro newspaper, and community-focused activist. We discuss his journey from New York to New Orleans, landing in Greensboro, North Carolina, and how much he disliked the city initially, and what inspires and motivates him today, as well as what he is focused on as he moves forward in his journey. As always, visit lilyless.com for more information on the podcast and platform. You can also contact us from the website if you have questions or ideas for people or topics you'd like to hear or see on the platform. Brian Clarey, thank you for joining. I appreciate
Sure, thanks
it.
for having me.
Yeah, I met you because I had a little music project for about 30 years. And
A little project.
my music partner passed away, Triad City Beat, which we will get into, was kind enough to run a story on that afterwards. We put out the last album last year, and I sincerely appreciated that. We'll get into legacy, and that to me is part of my friend Justin's legacy that passed away.
Sure.
So that was great. But having said that, before we get into the way back history, what's your story with Triad City Beat? Were you the founder?
Yeah. So I was fired from Yes Weekly, where I was the editor for 9 years, and so two of my staff quit. We threw all our money in together. This is, I have no business training at all, and we started this paper with about $47,000. Before I realized that most people start businesses don't use their own money. I didn't know that. And that was 10 years ago. The other two founders have moved on to other projects and other things. I'm still here, training up young writers, trying to fill the gaps in local news coverage, and trying to build something that will endure beyond my tenure.
Yeah. I find it fascinating and amazing. Independent local news. I think to me it's so important that I don't want to call it a niche. It's a necessity to me. And I find that there's less and less of it. And so how difficult is it to keep it rolling?
Well, so this is the thing. I got to Greensboro in 2000. I started my career in New Orleans, and I worked for this sort of funky little corner of the news industry called the alternative press.
Yep.
That goes all the way back to the Village Voice. And I started my career at the Gambit. I went to school went to Loyola in New Orleans. I graduated with a degree in journalism. So I worked for Gambit. I also was a bartender. I made a lot more money tending bar than I did as a journalist. But I wrote about food, music, and art, long-form narrative features, and that sort of thing. When I got to Greensboro in 2000, there was not an alt weekly here. So I worked everywhere I could. I worked the News and Record for a time. And when I was at the News and Record, they had 3 county reporters just to cover the county commission and county doings. Now they have 3 reporters. And all this happened after years. They were owned by Landmark. Landmark did their very first ever round of layoffs in 2007. And there was this sort of, we called it newspaper Armageddon happening from 2007 through really today. Huge, massive layoffs, almost always editorial staff. And then as hedge funds started to take over ownership of local daily newspapers, it just became this game of diminishing returns. So the News and Record was owned by Landmark, and the Winston-Salem Journal was owned by Media General, and then they both were bought by Warren Buffett, who immediately sold the properties, the big downtown properties out from under the two of them, and then flipped it over to a hedge fund operation called Lee Enterprises. And Lee Enterprises has been cutting staff and cutting coverage and all that. So with the alternative press, our history has always been to create a counter narrative to this crap that the mainstream media puts out, which I've always thought, even in the 80s and 90s was racist, putting mugshots of young black kids on the cover, tons of racist crime coverage, no pushback on police reports, and really just ignoring the people who are the most vulnerable, and treating the LGBTQ community as like a deviance rather than a community. And so now a lot of those things have become mainstream over the years. But the daily newspapers really had a handle on local government coverage. They had several. When I first got here, when I was at Yes Weekly, we used to elbow each other out for scoops on city council. There'd be 5 or 6 or 7 reporters covering what's going on in city council. Now, Greensboro, there's 2 that go to every meeting. I've got one that's paid for by a grant, and John Hammer at the Rhino Times, which is an ultra-conservative right-wing newspaper, and sometimes you read his coverage, and you wonder if you went to the same meeting as he did. There's nobody in Winston-Salem regularly covering city council. We cover, except us.
Yeah.
And so like, it's really weird. It's a very interesting time in our industry where like the alternative press, whereas a lot of alt papers are trying to hire like marijuana writers and, where they have the legal weed and stuff. And I'm trying to hire a county reporter. I'm trying to hire a school board reporter and figure out how to fund it because there's no narrative to push back against. No one is doing that first draft of history. And so we become the newspaper of record in a lot of ways. And that means changing some things, certainly in the thrust of our coverage. So we've been pivoting really heavily into local government coverage. Now, we're an alt weekly. We still do a lot of cultural coverage, and that's where that Story Bet Your Band comes in. We really try to stay off the nose on that sort of stuff. Everybody knows who's playing at the Coliseum, and all these, nobody cares about the symphony. People do care about the symphony, but we try to write about the folks that are getting missed by all the other outlets, because also just as local government coverage has sunk so low, cultural coverage has actually, and if you include, influencers and that sort of thing, stories about food and music and art, there's a lot more out there.
No.
Although there's not, and we could talk about the live local music scene too, which is a ghost of its former self.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that too. But yeah, we really try to stick to like BIPOC communities, immigrants. Greensboro is an incredible place. And I didn't think so when I moved here from New Orleans. I thought it sucked. But, kids in Guilford County schools speak 120 different languages.
Wow.
Blows my mind.
Yeah.
We are one of the most diverse cities in the state of North Carolina. And no one's covering those immigrant communities either, except we have one reporter that we share with a company called Next City, which is like a solutions journalism, and she's covering the immigrant communities because no one else is doing it. And, when you get to that local government coverage, it happens so slowly that people didn't even notice.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know what district they live in anymore. They don't know who their city council rep is, their county commission rep, their state rep in the House or Senate. And they're like, oh yeah, I guess, well, I always thought I was in, Gladys Robinson's district. It's like, well, you're not anymore. They recut those districts and now you're in, like the last redistricting, Greensboro, which is a blue city in a blue county, is going to be represented in the U.S. Congress by 3 Republicans.
Yeah.
Because they cracked and packed the city into 3 different districts.
Yep. So yeah, you said a lot there, and it goes well. I mean that in a your passion, your focus, where you spent a lot of time. Who you are. I don't want to say speaking for, but representing, right? Who you're trying to capture and represent and put out there. And for me, that takes us back long history. Where did you kind of grow up? Who are the people in your life that sort of guided, nudged you, influenced you toward where you are today? How much of that do you think is nature versus nurture?
I don't know. Well, I grew up on Long Island, New York, and my mother's an English teacher. I was reading from a very young age. I was writing from a very young age. I thought I was going to be a novelist, frankly, until I discovered journalism, and that wasn't until college. But looking back, it makes a lot of sense. I grew up in a media-centric place. My father read 5 newspapers a day. There were piles of them all over the house. I had been reading the papers every day since I was, 8 years old and looking at the Yankee scores and stuff. And so I went to college with no plan except to get out of Long Island and live in New Orleans and start writing novels at some point. But I had to pick a major. And so I guess I was about 19, and I took a writing for mass media class with a Jesuit priest named Father Raymond Schroth, who has written for, he passed recently, but he wrote for Esquire. He was the editor of Mother Jones and Commonweal, and he taught at Fordham, and he was a very highly regarded journalist, and he really taught me how to write for an audience, how to write a feature story, a lot of techniques and stuff. The first thing he said, I remember, he was like, you need to write, we always talk about show, don't tell in writing and in music and in all kinds of communication. And he's like, write in scenes. And it just exploded my mind right there. And I was just off and running, and I'm like, oh my God, I could be a feature writer like as a job. This is easier than writing a novel, even though you use a lot of the same techniques and devices. Like, your characters are already there. Your dialogue is already there. Your setting, your scene, your theme, you can always tease something like that out. And it's real. And I think people can really get a lot out of it. So it was an easy transition. And then I really just wanted to be a Metro columnist like Jimmy Breslin, who was one of my heroes when I was a kid, or Jim Dwyer, or in New Orleans, a guy named Lolis Eric Ellie, who was a columnist. And I was like, that's really what because you got your picture, you see. Yeah. And there's an ego thing here, of course. But everybody else just got a byline. But columnists got their picture. And Jimmy Breslin was a hero of mine, not just for the way he used the language, which he kind of cribbed off of Damon Runyon, who was also an old-time newspaper columnist, and wrote Guys and Dolls. Yep. Well, Guys and Dolls was based on his work, but first person present is the voice that Runyon used, that Breslin cribbed, and that I started using too. And the great story about Breslin, which exemplifies my own philosophy about journalism and reporting, when Kennedy was assassinated, Daily News is where Breslin was working at the time. They sent him down to D.C. to cover the funeral. There were thousands of journalists there, and they're all watching the motorcade. They're all looking at John and the salute and everything. Meanwhile, Jimmy Breslin went out to Arlington, and he interviewed the grave digger, the guy digging Kennedy's grave. He was the only one out there. Yeah. And this was his father was a grave digger, Breslin. So he had this insight. He's like, I'm going to go talk to this guy and see what it feels like to dig this hole that this man is going to go into. The whole country, the whole world's in shock about it. And, that's the angle that he took to it. And, off the nose, right? And so I think about that a lot. I talk to the young writers about that a lot too. Sometimes media can be like 5-year-olds playing soccer. Yeah. Where everybody's just crowded around the ball. And I don't know if that does people a lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned, New York to New Orleans to Greensboro. When did you come to Greensboro? Were there any people who had impact on you mentioned
absolutely.
When you first came, you thought Greensboro sucked. And
oh God, I was only 30 years old, remember? And I was a night person, like in New Orleans, man. So my bartending, I worked at a 24-hour bar, and my shift was 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. I was part of the underground, and then I got here, and it's so square, and I thought the music scene was kind of a joke, and the art, and I worked for an artist for a time, and I know a lot, a lot about fine art and food. I did a lot of art and food writing, and I thought for the most part, the art galleries were really disappointing, that the restaurants were not good. And I was like, we're staying a year and then we are out of here.
Yeah.
But so I met a guy named Ogie Overman, who had ESP magazine, which was in the alt weekly world, we call that a faux alt. or used to, because it's put out by a daily paper as like a pretend little cool arts and entertainment tabloid, but they don't write news in those.
Yeah.
But that was fine because that's what I was doing at the time. So I was making like $2 a word in New Orleans,
Yeah.
and I moved to Greensboro and started making 5 cents a word.
Nice.
I mean, but anyway, Ogie gave me a shot, so I did a lot of writing for him. And then Jerry Rowe over at the News and Record was really, really helpful to my career and influential. He gave me a column in Triad style, a nightlife column, which felt a little pigeonholed about that, because I do have a degree in journalism. But I did that for a time, and that was really fun. I was also freelancing a lot. I was doing a lot of travel writing, a lot of, it was great. I was able to stop working in restaurants because when I first got here, I worked in restaurants and bars and catering and stuff. I couldn't make the same money tending bar here that I could in New Orleans, which was frustrating because the bars closed at 2. And everybody goes, well, not everybody goes home, but so I started doing like fine dining because I do know a lot about wine and cheese and food and pairing and stuff like that. Because I've been writing about food. I know a lot of chefs, and I was able to stop doing that in like 2003 and just be a freelancer full time. And then late 2004, I got hired as the editor of Yes Weekly and helped start that paper. Yeah. And I did that for 9 years.
Okay. And outside of your work life, so I mean, it's obvious you've spent a lot of your life, I guess, not only chasing but achieving these dreams you had, but on the flip side of that, your personal life, where do you focus that?
Well, we've got 3 kids. They are grown-ish. My oldest is 24. He's a classical guitarist. Wow. And he is about to start grad school in Columbus, Georgia. He went to App State, went to high school, Weaver High School here in Greensboro. It's incredible what he can do. And like, you'll appreciate this. People are like, oh, he's so talented. I'm like, he's not talented. Yeah. He works hard. Talent means nothing when you're talking about the level that he's playing at. Yeah. It's, if you don't practice 3 or 4 hours a day, you lose it. And some talent, like he's got really great hands for it, long fingers, and he's able to concentrate and drill down. He has some gifts that help him be good, but you can't just pick a guitar and, Yeah. So anyway, I have another kid who's at App State studying math and philosophy with 1 more year. And my youngest goes to school in Boston. Yeah. Yeah, they said when they were like 16, they were like, I want to go to college in Boston. And I was like, well, I got good news and bad news. I mean, the bad news is I've been in journalism my whole career and I don't have any money. Yeah. And, Boston University costs $92,000 a year.
My niece is just about to go there.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I said, there's a lot of really small. There's 150,000 college students in Boston proper. And 35 or 50 schools in the area. And I was like, well, you got to look for some of these smaller schools. You've had straight A's since 2nd grade. You're taking AP classes. You have all these extracurriculars. You're a fantastic candidate. Start applying to some of these smaller schools, and I'll bet they'll hook you up. So, yeah, they did. They got 2 scholarships. Okay. One at Fisher College, which is a weird sort of university, sort of college. It's on, if you're familiar with it, it's on Beacon Street. It's in like 4 old mansions of old, like, kind of robber baron type folks who just gave everything over. And it's really international and very cool. I might have picked that one. Yeah. But it's not a traditional college experience. But they picked Emmanuel, which is right over there on the Fenway. It's part of this whole group of colleges. I never heard of it before. It's tiny, Catholic, and this kid was raised without religion, which is very interesting. But they like the Catholic Church because they think it's really goth, everybody wears black and the stained glass and creepy organs and incense. And so anyway, so they're 19 and are home for the summer, but just finished their freshman year. So we spend a lot of attention on our kids. Like every time in my whole career, when there was a choice between career or family, I generally pick family. Yeah. Like we didn't just pick up and move and I didn't look for other opportunities. We just wanted to have some sort of stability. My wife went to high school in Greensboro, but she grew up in Colorado. They moved here when she was like 15 and it totally upended her life. And where I grew up, like I went to high school with the same people I went to kindergarten with.
Yeah.
You know, I still talk to them. I could go back to Garden City right now and see 25 people I went to high school with if I walked down 7th Street. And she always thought that was just really, she was kind of jealous of it. Just thought it was great. So we work to give our kids that kind of stability. We've lived in the same house for 20 years. And just watching them, you know, also, you know, my wife and I grew up in less than ideal home situations for various reasons. And just to try to break some of those cycles.
Yeah.
And so it's really incredible watching them at this point try to be like, because I remember like when I was, you know, a young person, 2021, like, what the hell? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, are they expecting me to like grow up and like buy a car and pay insurance and like go to the doctor and stuff like, and where is a place in this world for me? So it's really interesting to see them. So we do spend a lot of time, just, you know, have for all this time. We're really about to be full on empty nesters. And so, you know, we've got to figure out what's next for us.
Yeah. Well, I was born and raised, I was in Boston the first 32 years of my life before we moved here. Still have family up there. I was just up there for work this week.
Nice. Yeah, we were there to pick up our kids a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's still winter up there. God.
Yeah. It's but you know, if she ever needs support up there, call me. I can point her to people.
Well, because I grew up in like this staunchly Irish Catholic town.
Yeah.
Half my high school going to college in Boston. It would have been and I'd never been there until I went to go look at schools with my kid. And I was like, it would have been very easy for me. It was very easy to envision myself in that alternate timeline where I had gone to like Holy Cross or something and just stuck around Boston and went to law school like everybody else. So, and I do have, so my friend Chris used to run Dig Boston, which is the all weekly up there. Yeah. That doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. They've converted to nonprofit and all that. And I have several of my friends from high school are there too. And my wife's niece, you know, Boston is a great place.
Yeah.
It's like a tiny, clean New York.
Well, I remember Dig, you know, back because we, you know, when I started this band, we were up there. And so The Noise and Boston Phoenix and all those papers that used to be up there.
Right. They're all gone.
Yeah.
They're all gone.
Yep.
And that's Boston. That's a media-centric town.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's really tough to operate in Boston too, though. Like you have to know people to sell ads. You have to, so they started something called the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, which maybe you've heard of. And they're doing a lot of that work, and surviving on grants and stuff because the ad revenue was just so tough to come by.
Yeah. Well, we chatted before and I mentioned, you know, stories and then the legacy piece of what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And most people, when they hear legacy, I've talked to the number of people now, it's like, well, I don't have any money. And it's like, well, legacy to me.
Nobody has any money except for the people who do.
Proper legacy is not financial. That may be a piece of it. But, you know, all the work you've done sounds like both professionally and personally. You what comes across to me when I listen to you talk is community.
Yeah.
Whether it's in your family or whether it's in the city you live in or whatever it is. And I wonder, with becoming empty nesters, you know, for you, maybe you and your wife, have you had talks about, you know, what is it that you want to say? What is all of this like kind of wrapping up to that you want to
all right, I'm going to say a bunch of things.
Okay.
I mean, it's something I tell my kids. So, you know, money, it's not even real.
Yeah.
Like we invented it.
Yeah.
And we all just agree that it has this value. And if every dime of it were to disappear overnight, I promise you that the sun would still come up in the morning. Relationships are real. Love is real. Hate is real. These are things that endure. Now, I never really, I guess I thought about most of my legacy is through my work. But that can be really tenuous. All my work for Yes Weekly is scrubbed off of their website. 9 years, it's about 2,000 stories, and that was the bulk of my journalism career. I don't really write that much anymore, but for the first 5 years or so of Triad City Beat, I did write about a third of the paper every week. I never wanted, it wasn't my dream to own a newspaper.
Yeah.
Like, I just wanted to be a cool ass writer who submitted my stuff, took a check, and then went to the bar.
Yeah.
But you go where you're needed.
Yeah.
And so I felt that there was a need to start this. Well, for one, when we started Triad City Beat, the way I pitched it to everybody, there was layoffs happening all over the place. And I'm like, let's just create a safe space to do good work where you don't got to worry about getting laid off or getting pushed over to like the economic development beat where you're interviewing chamber of commerce people and just, stenography type stuff. Let's just do this. And I had no idea it was going to last this long. I thought we'd probably do it for a few years and then we'd all just get, jobs somewhere. But it's become something bigger than that. And now I'm starting to see how this can endure like beyond me, because the need is greater than it was when we started the paper for this, especially the local news, local government, local elections reporting. And then you start to think, wow, this is like kind of a big part of the way our country is supposed to operate. Like, it's the First Amendment, the very first one that articulates how important the role of the press is to how we do things in the United States. And I start to think about that a lot. And so, yeah, like most of my time now is spent towards sustainability of the project. I've been applying for grants all week, selling ads and doing, and, I'm about to beef up our server so we can have a more, well, our server's 10 years old, so it's time. And we have a dedicated private server. It's in like Seattle or something like that. But I save a fortune just by doing it ourselves like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, professionally, I think the Triad City Beat is going to be my legacy beyond, unless I unless I finally sit down and type out some of these novels that I have kicking around in my head, which I would like to do that. My wife is a naturopathic physician.
Oh, cool.
But so when our last kid went off to college, she went back to college.
Oh, wow.
So she's a freshman. She just finished her freshman year at App State as a virtual student. And I could see her going all the way through a master's and a doctorate with this. Like, she's tireless and she's just getting started. And I will tell you, she doesn't spend a minute thinking about her legacy.
Yeah.
I do. So I have a book out that I'm glad it's there. I published a book of journalism in 2011, cool. Which is interesting. Personally, I was just thinking about this on the way over here, as a matter of fact. It's so morbid. But I was like, who's going to show up when I die?
Yeah.
And some of that depends on how long you live.
Yeah.
You live long enough, all your friends are dead and nobody's able to show up. You die young, man, a lot. That's a full house.
Yeah.
So like, we do talk about what comes next for us.
Yeah.
Personally. And do we still get along? This happens to a lot of parents after their kids move out. So far, we seem to still get along pretty well.
Yeah, that's good. You've got, of course, so I interviewed Lydia Lunch for one of the former episodes. And, when I asked her, one of the things I usually ask people is, how are you capturing things you want to leave behind? And she was like, I've got everything captured. I've been capturing it for 30 years and it's all out there already. And you've got a whole body of work that's out there. But are there things that you're doing or thinking about with regard to, say, capturing personal messages, things of that nature? I had somebody reach out to me because of this project, and, they want to make a playlist and they want to have a song for each friend and an intro they want to record for each song. And that was an idea I had a while ago. So this aligned, and I was like, great. So I'm looking forward to working with them and helping them with that.
It's really interesting.
And I'm wondering if you're doing anything.
God, I mean, it depends on how you go, right? I mean, I could be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I don't have anything prepared. But I was thinking about this for some reason. I had this in my head when I was driving down to MLK, and I'm like, I should probably write something to have my wife. I'm pretty sure my wife's going to outlive me. I should add, I was a very hard drinker for a very long time. I quit drinking back in 2011. I've also done a lot of other, dry goods and all those assorted things involved with being part of the New Orleans underground. I stayed away from needle drugs because I'm not good with needles. But, so I have no idea how long I'm going to live. My father's father died in his 50s.
Yeah.
My father was 79 though, and he drank and smoked heavily his whole life, most of his life, and he lived longer than anyone else in his family's recorded history. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that I would someday in a moment of clarity sit down and type something out. Or if I know it's getting close, I might pull like the Warren Zevon, right? Where, if I get at least some lead time, I'll just do a lot of writing.
Yeah.
Because that's my medium.
I think the reflection piece and doing it regularly, I get your emails that you send out, and you've almost started to do some of this. I remember you mentioned the person who passed away, the father that was, helped get you into things. I remember that piece. I remember you wrote a piece about your daughter going up to Boston to college. So in a way, you've kind of captured. I mean, it would almost be interesting to capture all of those things. And
some of it, a lot of that is in my book, because at Yes Weekly, I actually did become a Metro column. I was the editor, so I gave myself a Metro column called Crashing the Gate.
Yeah.
And my style of writing a column, some of it is deeply personal.
Yeah.
Some of it is reporting, and some of it is, that Breslin style, off the nose take on a news event. But I also just had a lot to get. And when I started writing, it was all very personal, because I felt like that was, because all writing, it's got to be the truth. Or else, even if it's a novel that you're making up, it's got to be true in that one sort of at its foundation. And for me, they say, just open up a vein and let it bleed on the page. And that was a way for me to learn how to be real and true. So I wrote a lot of I had a column in my college paper too. And so a lot of it was personal in that way. And so my book is full of stuff about my kids. Cause a lot of times too, like your weekly deadline hits and you're like, I haven't done any reporting. Let's see what the kids are up to, huh? But also another influence of mine I should really cite is Irma Bombeck. I loved Irma Bombeck's columns, and I read a lot. My grandparents had her books. I used to read all her books, and it was hilarious the way she was able to turn family life into this fodder. So I did a lot of stuff like that. As they're old, I don't write about my kids very much anymore. They're older. They have their own lives. They're entitled to privacy in that way. But yeah, when they were young, I'm like, if I'm feeding them and putting them up, they're my material. I don't have a problem using them for that. So now, while all my Yes Weekly stuff it exists somewhere on a server somewhere. I've been in talks with him to try to release some of that stuff. Some of it might get me in trouble because it's older, and some of the things that I wrote about might not be as acceptable as they once were.
Sure.
I can live with it. I can't think of anything offhand, but who knows? I was drinking back then.
Yeah. You and me both.
Yeah.
How about on the legal side? So I know you mentioned your father was a lawyer. So.
Yeah, no, we met with someone right around the time our dads died.
Yeah.
I should say, for the podcast, my wife and I, our fathers died within 6 weeks of each other in 2002. It was really bad. It was horrible for the kids, or both their grandfathers and everything. But so yeah, we were like, wow. So we did go see an attorney. We do have paperwork. We have a plan. We have, we don't have that much, but we don't want our kids are pretty close, but we just want them to be pretty clear cut.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the biggest upside is, you're not putting other people in
just dumping it on them.
Position to make difficult decisions.
Right. Well, you're just dumping it on everybody, and that's and neither one of us were looking forward to it.
Yeah.
But because it is uncomfortable, and nobody wants to sit there and think about death all day. I mean, that's a long, sad day.
Yeah.
But we were like, well, we can't do nothing.
Yeah.
And we don't have much, but we have some things. We have a house. We have some accounts. We have some stocks and stuff, and our vehicles and all that. And we don't think our kids will fight over it, but it's better to just get it down on paper.
Yeah. No. Cool. I don't Triad City beat. So where I'm not going to ask like 5 years. Who the hell knows if we're even here?
Oh my God. No one in journalism has a 5-year plan.
Nobody has a 5-year plan. People think they do. But I mean, if we say it's almost June 2024 now, where's the focus for TCB in June 2024?
Well, so I've had a lot of business training over the last few years to try to make this thing go. And so we've actually really tweaked our business model. Well, tweaked our editorial model to veer much harder into local government, local news, and elections, because we did more election coverage than anyone else for that round for the primaries this year. And we're going to do more than anybody else for the general election, with events and an election guide and profiles and drill down on the races and stuff. It's really important. And creating informed voters is really important. Over on the business side, Report for America put out a report in like 2023 or 2022 saying what all of us knew, which is that the business model is fundamentally and permanently broken, which means for free papers, all our revenue was ads.
Yeah.
All of it. Sometimes events, but print advertising. And everybody picked up those papers. You're from that era, everybody, old, young, black, white, Latina, everybody picked up those papers to see what's going on. Everybody with any sort of cultural sense wanted to look at the Alt Weekly to feel connected to the cultural side of the city and the things that they weren't getting everywhere else. And it was easy. We didn't know how easy it was. It's when you're selling ads, it's like, okay, what size ad do you want? You want it every week for a year or 6 months, and you just book it, and you could book out your whole year in January. Now there's so many more products, and you see newsletters is a huge part of what we do, and sponsored content, and we have a ticketing platform, and we have a reader revenue program, but we're making up the gaps with grants and gifts.
Yeah.
So we got our first grant from the North Carolina Local News Lab Fund 2023, and that pays for our city council reporter. It boosted our readership so much, which eventually revenue is kind of a lagging indicator.
Yeah.
Which eventually boosted our revenue. Now we can cover this reporter. And so I've got another grant request out for a county reporter, and I've got the grant I'm working on now is for $100,000 over 2 years, and that's going to be seismic if we get that. That's a thing called Press Forward.
Cool.
And I'm working on that. So I'm diversifying the business model, making us more resilient. I've gotten us this far without any significant debt. I just paid off I have one pandemic era loan outstanding. It says SBA loan.
Yeah.
It's $20,000. It costs like $100 a month, so it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
But I'd like to knock that off. And then at some point, I'm going to sell it, I guess. I'm either going to sell it to somebody I trust to bring it more forward, or sell it to the employees, or that. I'm still not really sure. I feel like I'm 54. I feel like I probably got 10 more years in me on this, but yeah, I am every time I think I want to go do something else, the need for what I do now becomes more pronounced.
Yeah.
And, I'm not real religious. Even though I went to a Jesuit university, I was raised Catholic. I don't go to church. I don't pray. But I do believe in service.
Yeah.
And I believe that what you do with your life either gives or takes. and I want to be on the give side.
Yeah.
And so I've always gone like well, not always, but the last 10 or 15 years of my career, I've just gone where I'm needed, so where I'm needed now is building this business and making sure that I can train up young writers and have them go out and do hundreds of stories and thousands of stories and build their own bodies of work. At this point, I stopped writing my column. I kept a weekly column throughout because that's what I always wanted to do. And I stopped doing it as part of my training because a business technique that's really effective is called the stop doing.
Yeah, delegating.
It's like, well, what are you going to stop doing so you can do this other stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, my column. And I won an award for this damn column last year. But, if I've been writing a weekly column in Greensboro for 20 years and I still have something that I haven't said yet, that's my fault. So I gave that column to Sayaka, our editor.
Yeah.
And I still write the editorial every week because I'm the only one who really understands state government and has the time to dive in on it. And I do. So I write about state government a lot in the editorial because it's a total mess.
Yeah.
It's a minority rule situation. We're well on our way to a fascist dictatorship. And North Carolina is one of the states who's helping pave the way for it.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, I will say, so I am a First Amendment Society member, so
yes,
people can also support through subscriptions on
that is our reader revenue program.
Yeah.
We started that. Well, we always had a donate button.
Yeah.
Just whatever. People threw us a few bucks on PayPal, and I think it's making us a few $100 a year. But we formalized it right at the front end of the pandemic when, I'll tell you, so I was covering the men's ACC basketball tournament in March 2020. And on day 3 of the tournament, we all got in there and they just sent us all home.
Oh, wow.
Right. Remember that day, right before they were canceling tournaments all over, and like they canceled the Final Four. And I went and picked up my kids from school. I'm like, well, this is a real problem. And then I went and looked at my ad spreadsheet, and I was looking at all my advertisers, restaurants, events, art galleries, theater. I'm just like, and I start pulling things off the spreadsheet, and I only have one advertiser left, an automotive shop, Taylor Tire, which he sold a year later. I was like, we have no advertisers. We have no revenue. We stopped printing the paper because there was no one going out to pick it up and there was nowhere to put it. And then all this news was happening. First, all the healthcare stuff and the COVID news and the body counts and the where do I get this? What do I do if this happens? And so we really dove into that. And then that summer was the racial reckoning.
Yeah.
And that's been, covering the activists and the protests. That's been a huge part of what my teams have done going all the way back to 2004. So we were like, well, damn. So we started live streaming protests, and it was really incredible. I was there in downtown Greensboro when the whole thing popped off.
Yeah.
Live streaming. I personally covered the march from Burlington to Graham. All these like just young black folks and all these old white, Klansman type, screaming at them. And it's just burned in my brain forever. And it was such an honor to be able to be there for all that. And I was like, well, let's just cover the news until we run out of money. And we didn't run out of money. And that's where I discovered all these other alternative sources of funding. And that reader revenue program last year brought in like 10% of our sale, it equated to about 10% of our sales revenue.
Yeah.
On top is about $15,000, which was incredibly helpful. It paid for all our free. At the end of the year, you'll see I do a report on what we use the money for.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. I know you got things to do, but again, I appreciate this.
For sure, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Really nice to meet you. I'll let you know when it's coming out, and I'll throw some links to all your stuff.
Yeah, we'll push it out on our social and stuff,
Cool, man. Yeah, appreciate it.
Right on. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. the most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.